Well, this was an excellent video. The gentleman I interviewed did a wonderful job, and it should have been outstanding, but technologically challenged. Mr. Nesbitt hit the wrong button at the end of the interview, and I unfortunately lost his video. So you can't see him speaking to me, you can only hear him speaking. Even what you hear, the audio isn't the best quality that I could have had if I had not made my mistake. Nonetheless, we're going to try and make the best of it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to play for you a segment, an excerpt of this interview, and every few seconds I'll stop the video and give you some commentary on vocabulary you might not know or expressions that you might not know. So here we go. Bonjour, monsieur.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Comment vous appelez-vous?
Je m'appelle Philippe.
Philippe. Je m'appelle Steve. Enchanté.
Enchanté, Steve.
Bon, comment allez-vous, Philippe?
Je vais très bien aujourd'hui, merci. Et vous?
Moi, je vais bien, merci. Il fait froid, ça caille, mais ça va, plus ou moins. Est-ce que vous habitez aux États-Unis?
Oui, j'habite aux États-Unis.
Donc, et vous êtes américain?
Oui, monsieur, je suis américain.
Alors, comment se fait-il que vous parlez français?
Ah bon, alors ma mère était suisse.
Ah, d'accord. Et vous êtes né ici aux États-Unis ou en Suisse?
Oui, je suis né à Boston.
Ah, d'accord, ok, donc aux États-Unis. Et vous parliez français à la maison quand vous étiez petit ou?
Oui, j'ai parlé français quand j'étais petit avec mes parents.
Ah, d'accord, ok. Bon, actuellement, est-ce que vous habitez en ville ou à la campagne, dans une maison, en appartement? Quel est votre contexte?
À présent, j'habite dans une maison, un peu à la campagne.
D'accord, ok. Dans la banlieue d'une grande ville, peut-être?
Dans la banlieue de San Diego.
Ah, d'accord, ok, très bien. Well, in that first section, just right off the bat, he used the expression "je vais très bien." When I ask him, "Comment allez-vous?" you expect to hear the answer, "Très bien," "pas mal," "mal," or whatever it happens to be. But there's a little more lengthy way in which that can be said. Instead of simply saying "très bien," you can say "je vais très bien." Sounds as though you're saying "I go." That doesn't seem to make sense when somebody asks you how you're doing. I go very well. But that is indeed how it's said in French. Je vais très bien. You remember the expression I've mentioned to you before. Ça va? And you answer, ça va. Well, that uses the verb aller also, doesn't it? It means it goes, which is to say things are going well. Ça va. And so he says, je vais très bien. But he could have simply said très bien. Secondly, he said something which you might find a little confusing. He said, je suis américain. It's not terribly difficult to understand, but he seems to be missing a word. He seems to have left out a word there. Je suis américain. You would expect him to say, je suis un américain. Or for a woman, je suis une américaine. However, he just says, je suis américain. I am American. Sounds like he's speaking like a caveman. But actually in French, that's how it is. Typically in English, when you're talking about a person's position, their status, their role in life, like a teacher, a student, or their nationality, American or French, whatever, we would say, I'm an American, or I am a Frenchman, or I am a teacher, or I am a student. But in French, you don't use the indefinite article a or an before a position or a role in life. So you would say, je suis professeur. I would say to you, tu es élève. I don't say tu es un élève. I just say tu es élève. Talking about nationality. Je suis français. Il, talking about our interviewee here, il est suisse. Now he's an American citizen, but Suisse is Swiss. Il est suisse. I don't say il est un Suisse. I say il est suisse. All right, so he did not make a mistake. That is correct French. And of course, I just mentioned the word Suisse. Suisse is both the name of the country, La Suisse, for Switzerland, and it's also a nationality. Je suis américain, il est suisse. D'accord? And then last of all, he used the expression la banlieue. La banlieue are the outskirts or the suburbs of a city, is la banlieue. La banlieue. Okay? Okay, let's move on to the next section. Est-ce que vous êtes marié?
Oui, je suis marié.
Et avez-vous des enfants?
Oui, j'ai 6 enfants.
Ah d'accord, super. Nous en avons 9, donc
Oh là là.
j'adore les grandes familles. Hein, c'est une bénédiction. Alors,
Moi,
est-ce que vous avez des animaux domestiques, tels qu'un
oui,
chien, un chat?
nous avons 2 chiens.
D'accord, 2 chiens, ok. Et puis, bon, à la maison, qu'est-ce que vous faites pour aider votre femme avec l'entretien de la maison, par exemple?
Ah, une bonne question. Alors,
Question indiscrète
j'aide,
peut-être.
j'aide avec les enfants. J'aide les préparer pour aller au lit.
Oui.
J'aide à les enseigner.
Mhm.
J'aide aussi à la cuisine.
Ah, vous faites la cuisine?
Faire les devoirs, un petit peu, oui.
Est-ce que vous aimez faire la cuisine?
Oui, mais je suis... ma femme est beaucoup meilleure chef que moi.
Oui, je comprends. C'est pareil chez moi aussi. Et puis, pendant la semaine ou pendant la journée scolaire, disons, qu'est-ce que vous faites? Est-ce que vous étudiez, vous travaillez?
Je travaille.
D'accord, ok.
Alors, je suis... oh, pardon. Je suis directeur
Une société?
une société, voilà.
D'accord, ok. Et bon, à quelle heure est-ce que vous commencez à travailler chaque jour?
Je commence à 8h30.
D'accord. Actuellement, vous travaillez à partir de chez vous ou est-ce que vous allez dans un bureau quelque part?
Non, je vais toujours dans un bureau.
D'accord, ok.
Oui.
Et à quelle heure est-ce que votre travail termine à la fin de la journée?
Mon travail termine à 5h30.
D'accord, ok.
Oui.
Donc 7 heures.
17h30.
All right, in that last section, you heard him talking about the ways in which he helps at home. J'aide. Par exemple, j'aide à mettre les enfants au lit. Talking about mettre les enfants au lit. You know what the lit is? Le lit. Hein? Je dors dans le lit. Putting the children to bed. Je mets les enfants au lit. That was the expression, mettre les enfants au lit or aller au lit. There's another French expression for to go to bed, and that's se coucher. Se coucher. Je me couche. Je me couche à 9 heures. I go to bed at 9 o'clock, for example. But that verb will be learned in Unit 2. However, other things he mentioned, ways he helps around the home, he says, j'aide à enseigner les enfants. Enseigner is to teach. So it's the opposite of apprendre. And then j'aide à faire la cuisine. He said, j'aide à faire la cuisine. So he helps in cooking, doing the cooking in the home, the preparation of meals, faire la cuisine. Something which you might have noticed between the word j'aide, aider, you know, aider, that verb, aider, j'aide, and then faire, for la cuisine, there was a word that appeared between those two words. J'aide à faire la cuisine. And this is something which in the future lessons you'll be learning, is that certain verbs in French, when they're followed by another verb, in between those two verbs must appear a preposition. That's a little word like à, or de, or en. Must appear between the two. For example, if I want to say I'm going to do something in French, I say je vais. Oh, excuse me, that is Spanish. I'm thinking. Skip it. Forget that one. I'll give you a different example. I am learning to do something in French. J'apprends. J'apprends à, for example, I'm learning to ski. J'apprends à faire du ski. The à must appear between apprendre and faire. J'apprends à faire du ski. Well, we'll not go into this now. This will be studied later on. But I just want to mention that when you have two verbs side by side, sometimes you have to put a preposition. It's a little word in between the two verbs. He also said, there's an expression he uses repeatedly, and it's because French-speaking people use it repeatedly, and that's un petit peu. Slowing it down, it's un petit peu, which means a little bit, un petit peu. You know, un peu is a little, un petit peu corresponds to the idea of a little bit in English. Now, I said slowing it down is because usually when one speaks quickly in French, you don't really pronounce the first syllable of petit. You say, it's said like this, un petit peu, un petit peu. That's maybe not the most elegant, intellectual, well-educated French, but that's the way I talk, which is a more relaxed fashion. Instead of saying un petit, the peu gets swallowed up basically, and instead of saying un, one says un, you bring your lips together like that, un petit peu, un petit peu. All right, so un petit peu is a little bit, and a very common expression. And he also uses the word meilleur, talking about his wife. Meilleur means better. She's a better cook than he is, he claims. And he also is the directeur d'une société. The director is not hard to understand, but une société is a company. It sounds like society, but it has the idea of company in French. He also talked about, I asked when it was he started his work day, and he said, je commence le travail à 8h30. Now it's in Unit 2 that you learn how to tell time or express time. However, it's 8 heures. Heure is the French word for hour. And so if you want, and it corresponds when you're talking about time, expressing time, it corresponds to o'clock. So if I want to say it's 1 o'clock, I say il est, it is, il est 1 heure. I don't say un, I say une because une is a feminine word. Il est 2 heures, il est 3 heures, il est 4 heures, il est 5 heures, etc. Okay? So he said, je commence à 8 heures, et demi, which is in a half. In other words, 8:30, a half an hour. À 8h30. Then I ask him what time you finish. And he says, je termine le travail à 5h30. À 5h30. So 5 and a half, in other words, 5:30. Finish it in the afternoon at 5:30. But at the very end, if you listen carefully, he doesn't say 5h30. He says 17h30. Now, I would say 17h30, but it's the same idea. Is in French, you use, if you're living in France or in many other European countries, you're going to use what we call military time. But to them, it's not military time. It's just for the natural way they say, express the idea of AM or PM. Of course, in the morning, the hours are, say you wake up at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. In French, it would be 6 heures, 7 heures, 8 heures, 9 heures, 10 heures, 11 heures. Midi is noon. But as soon as you get in the afternoon, you say 13 o'clock for 1 o'clock. Whoa! 13 o'clock, 14 o'clock, 15 o'clock. And this is not just what you see printed, for example, in a train station on the schedule on the wall. This is actually how people talk. Rarely would you say 5h30. You'd have to preface it by saying, or you have to add to it by saying 5h30 de l'après-midi, which means in the afternoon. That would get across the idea of PM. But more commonly, people just say je termine le travail à 17h30, which is 17:30. In other words, 5:30 in the afternoon. Well, if that confuses you, ask your parents to explain it to you. But nonetheless, that's what he said. 17h30. C'est quand il termine le travail. And I'm sticking to it. And there's one more thing I just want to point out. As I'm talking with him, you're hearing me say over and over again, votre, votre, votre. You know vous, of course. And of course, you can probably tell. I'm using vous. I'm speaking to him respectfully because this gentleman, I'm meeting him for the first time. He's not a close buddy. We're not in the same family. We're not members of the same church or whatever. And so we speak in a more formal fashion with each other. And I use vous in speaking to him. Votre is the same idea, but it's the possessive adjective your. So if I say your family, if I were speaking to my brother or a close friend or something, I'd say ta famille for your brother or your family. If I'm speaking, however, to this gentleman I'm interviewing, I say votre famille. That's the formal, respectful way to get across the idea of your family, for example. Okay? All right. Let's look at the next section. Entendu. Bon, dans votre temps libre, qu'est-ce que vous aimez faire?
J'aime lire des livres.
Oui.
J'aime écouter la musique.
Oui.
J'aime jouer avec les enfants.
Mm-hmm. D'accord.
J'aime regarder mes enfants faire du sport, mais je prends des photos.
Ah, d'accord, c'est super. Est-ce que vous regardez beaucoup la télé?
Oui, Je regarde beaucoup la télé.
D'accord. Et qu'est-ce que vous aimez regarder? Quel genre d'émission ou de programme?
Nous aimons beaucoup les films classiques, euh, les, les comédies,
Mhm.
les films de période ancienne un peu,
D'accord, ok.
et un peu des mystères.
Ah oui, d'accord, ok, très bien. Et au niveau de la musique, vous avez dit que vous aimez écouter de la musique. Quel genre de musique est-ce que vous préférez?
Alors j'aime tous les sorts. J'aime beaucoup la musique classique.
Oui.
J'aime un peu le jazz et nous écoutons beaucoup du rock.
Ah d'accord, ok, très bien. Et est-ce que vous-même vous jouez d'un instrument?
Quand j'étais étudiant, j'ai joué la guitare classique.
D'accord, ok. Notice throughout the conversation, this last section, he was using over and over again infinitives. I asked him, what are things that you like to do? Qu'est-ce que vous aimez faire? And he said, j'aime écouter de la musique. J'aime regarder la télé. J'aime, I don't remember the other things he likes now, but in any case, in each case, notice the second verb is in the entire infinitive form. Not j'aime écoute, but j'aime écouter, j'aime regarder, j'aime prendre des photos de mes enfants, etc. Okay? So that was a good example of what you do when you have two verbs side by side, back to back, how the second is not changed or conjugated. I asked him about faire du sport. Est-ce que vous faites du sport? Do you play sports? And currently he does not. However, in the past he's played tennis. There are two expressions in French for the idea of playing a sport. When you talk about sports in general, do you play sports or do you participate in sports? Or let's just say I participate in sports or I play sports. I would say je fais du sport. Faire doesn't seem like the logical choice. You'd think you'd say, woohoo, jouer, like we do in English. But talking about just the idea of participating in the sports world, you say faire du sport. Je fais du sport. Now, if you play a specific sport and you mention what sport it is you play, then you change the expression to, and then you do use jouer. Je joue au basket. Je joue au baseball. Je joue au football, which is very more common for a French-speaking person. Je joue au foot. Or je joue au football. Okay? And then he talked about prendre des photos. I actually just alluded to that expression a moment ago when I said il aime prendre des photos. Prendre, you understand, and photos are pictures, like these on the wall back behind me. These are photos, spelled just like photos in English, but pronounced photo. J'aime prendre des photos. Et puis ensuite, ah oui, les films classiques. He talks about different kinds of movies and he likes to watch. He has a theater background himself, an acting background. That's what he studied in college, and so he has good taste in movies. Apparently, he likes classic movies which are from an older period in the past as well, which are classics. Donc voilà, des films. Next section. Vous avez dit que vous lisez beaucoup. Est-ce que vous lisez le journal aussi bien que des livres?
Non, pas beaucoup. J'aime plutôt les livres. D'accord.
Écrivez beaucoup de correspondances, des lettres, des cartes postales, des courriers électroniques?
Malheureusement, non.
Non, pas trop?
Non. Je devrais écrire plus de lettres, mais...
D'accord. Mais dans votre travail comme directeur, est-ce que vous écrivez beaucoup d'emails, n'est-ce pas?
Beaucoup d'emails, oui.
Je m'en doutais. D'accord. Bon, parlez-moi un peu de vos talents, vos capacités. Qu'est-ce que vous savez faire?
Qu'est-ce que je sais faire?
Vous savez parler français.
Alors, je sais parler le français, oui.
Chose que je n'ai pas demandé, est-ce que vous savez parler anglais aussi?
Ah oui, je sais parler l'anglais aussi.
D'accord.
Je sais jouer la guitare un petit peu.
Voilà.
Je sais comment programmer un ordinateur.
Ça c'est super.
Alors,
en fait, bon, vous avez déjà dit... il y a une chose qui m'est venue à la tête, mais je l'ai oublié. Mais comme vous habitez à San Diego, vous parlez espagnol aussi peut-être?
Non, je parle pas beaucoup d'espagnol. Un petit peu.
D'accord, ok.
Un petit
D'accord.
peu. Ma femme parle espagnol.
D'accord, ok. Ah oui, c'est ça, vous savez, bon, vous connaissez la photographie apparemment parce que vous aimez filmer vos enfants.
Oui, ouais, voilà, je sais la photographie.
Voilà. Alors, qu'est-ce que vous faites pour faire de l'exercice? Est-ce que vous courez, vous faites du jogging?
Non, plutôt, je prends les chiens pour une petite promenade.
D'accord, ok. Moi aussi, c'est ce que je fais avec ma chienne. Bon, est-ce que vous aimez le sport?
J'aime regarder le sport, mais je devrais aimer le sport plus, mais à présent, je suis en train de perdre un peu de poids et
Ah,
de devenir plus sportif.
ah d'accord, c'est bien, bravo. Quand vous étiez petit ou jeune, est-ce que vous faisiez du sport?
Oui, j'ai joué au tennis.
Ah d'accord, ok,
Oui,
c'est
j'aimais
bien.
beaucoup le tennis.
Mais vous n'y jouez plus?
Pas à présent.
D'accord, d'accord. I talked about I asked him about the things that he writes, and he doesn't do a lot of correspondence right now. However, of course, at work, il écrit beaucoup de courrier électronique, which is the more formal term for email. Courrier électronique literally is electronic mail. However, you can also simply use the word in English with a French pronunciation. J'écris des emails. You can use that for email as well. Again, you hear the expression twice, two more times in this paragraph, or in this section of the interview, you hear him say un petit peu, for a little bit. So that's quite a common expression. He talked about programmer. Il sait programmer des ordinateurs. He knows how to program computers. So that's pretty profound. It's pretty amazing. He also talked about, as far as getting exercise, il se promène avec son chien. He takes the dog for walks. He used the word promenade, which is the noun for a walk, une promenade. If you've ever done any square dancing, you've heard that term before, promenade. The actual verb to go for a walk is se promener. Je me promène avec mon chien, par exemple. And then he says, several times he uses the expression à présent. There's another word in French for expression to get across the same idea that you've probably heard more often from me, which is actuellement. Sounds like actually, but again, that's a false cognate. Actuellement means currently. And he uses the expression à présent, which should be at the present moment or currently. À présent. And then last of all, he talks about getting more into sports, and he wants to be more sportif. Sportif means athletic, I guess we'd say, in English. Qui est-ce qui va faire les courses pour la famille? Est-ce que c'est votre femme, c'est vous-même, et où allez-vous pour acheter de la nourriture?
Normalement, c'est moi qui fais les courses.
Ah d'accord.
C'est une occupation que j'aime beaucoup.
D'accord. Et quand vous allez, j'aurais dû demander pour le travail, quand vous allez au travail, est-ce que vous prenez la voiture, le train, le bus?
Je prends la voiture.
La voiture, d'accord. C'est une question bizarre, mais en France, facilement, on prendrait le bus, on prendrait un train même. Moi, je prenais le train tous les jours au travail quand j'étais en France.
D'accord.
Et puis, est-ce que vous sortez, votre famille, vous sortez souvent au restaurant?
Avec 6 enfants, nous ne sortons pas très souvent, de temps en temps.
Avec 9 enfants, même moins, je vous assure.
On aime beaucoup cuisiner à la maison,
oui.
Faire des petits pique-niques, manger dehors.
Et c'est pareil pour le ciné, vous n'allez pas souvent au ciné, je présume.
De temps en temps, nous allons de temps en temps au cinéma, mais pas beaucoup.
D'accord, ok. Est-ce que vous... Comment?
Pardon. Non, c'est difficile de trouver des films que tous les enfants aiment.
Bien entendu, oui, c'est sûr. Est-ce que votre famille assiste à une église? Est-ce que vous allez à l'église?
Oui, nous allons à une église catholique.
D'accord, ok, c'est bien. In this last section, the previous section, he used the word souvent, which you've heard before. Souvent means often. He also talked about faire des pique-niques. Un pique-nique is just like what it sounds like, a picnic. And then he used the expression de temps en temps, very common expression. De temps en temps means from time to time, de temps en temps. Et bon, les langues que vous savez parler, vous parlez anglais, vous parlez français, et vous ne parlez pas espagnol, est-ce que vous parlez d'autres langues?
Non, quand j'étais petit, j'ai appris un petit peu d'italien et d'allemand, parce que nous habitons en Suisse, mais je me souviens pas beaucoup.
Donc je n'ai pas compris, vous êtes né à Boston, mais,
Oui.
mais vous avez habité en Suisse aussi?
Oui, j'avais été près de Lausanne.
Ah d'accord, pendant combien d'années? Jusqu'à quel âge?
Ben, c'était... mon père était américain, alors on a dû aller d'une place à l'autre très souvent. Alors
d'accord.
c'était vraiment pour peut-être une demi-année chaque année.
Entendu, d'accord. Ok. Donc, bon, à l'université, qu'est-ce que vous avez étudié?
J'ai étudié le théâtre.
Ah, le théâtre, c'est intéressant. C'est pour ça que vos goûts en film surtout sont assez variés, non pas seulement variés, mais plus recherchés. D'accord, c'est intéressant.
Oui, c'est intéressant.
Ouais. Et vous ne faites plus de théâtre actuellement?
Non, pas beaucoup. Ma fille s'intéresse beaucoup au théâtre, mais c'est difficile de... c'est une carrière qui est assez difficile. Alors j'ai dû changer.
Oui, entendu, je comprends. Il faut être pratique. Alors, et finalement, qu'est-ce que vous pensez faire aujourd'hui après le travail?
Ben, ce soir, on va faire le dîner, peut-être jouer des jeux avec les enfants.
D'accord.
C'est tout.
Et pour vous reposer le soir, vous écoutez la musique, vous regardez la télé, c'est ça à peu près?
Oui, à peu près. Peut-être on lit un petit peu, on regarde la télé.
D'accord, ok. Bon, merci beaucoup Philippe, ça a été vraiment un plaisir de faire votre connaissance et en même temps d'entendre un peu sur votre vie. Merci.
Ben, vous aussi, monsieur Steve. Merci beaucoup.
Well, in this last section, he shares about some language learning he's done in the past when he used to live. I don't know if he caught this, but he split his time between Boston and Switzerland when he was a young boy growing up. They'd spend a few months in half the year maybe in Switzerland and half the year here in the United States, his family. His mother was Swiss, his father was American. And so he learned a bit of Italien and Allemand. Italien, of course, is Italian, and Allemand is German. And now, why would he learn those particular languages, along with the French, which he speaks so well, and of course his knowledge of English, because he grew up in a family with an American father. Switzerland, being surrounded by Germany, and I'm not going to try and tell you what countries because I'll forget which ones, Germany, France, Italy, and probably Austria, but I'm not going to, don't bet on it. But in any case, because it's surrounded by these other countries, and it's a small country, people in Switzerland, in different parts of Switzerland, will speak not just a particular language in Switzerland, which is called, I think in French you'd say romanche. In English, I think it's, I don't know how it's pronounced, but it's romanche, I think. That's a specifically Swiss language, and I can't tell you a thing about it. But they also speak French, probably especially if they live close to the French border. They speak Italian, and they speak German in order to be able to converse with people in the countries immediately around them. And so language learning is obviously a very important issue in Europe. I can give you an example. Living in the north of France, where we lived for 13 years, I believe it was 5 different languages were spoken as the native language of countries within 250 miles of us. Think how far 250 miles is from where you're living right now. And just imagine, for example, for me, I could still be within the lower peninsula of Michigan, the state of Michigan, and be within, well, okay, we'll say the upper peninsula, and be within 250 miles of home. So I'm still within the same state. And 5 different languages are the native languages of the countries that would be, or at least in Europe, the countries which are within that radius. And so, for example, where we lived in northern France, French, of course, was the native language of France. Luxembourgish for Luxembourg, and German, of course, And let's see, Flemish for Belgium was one of the two native languages, and then Dutch, which is very close to Flemish, in the Netherlands. And you can go across the English Channel from where we lived, and English is the native language, of course, in Great Britain. And so I guess that's 6. So 5 or 6 languages were spoken within 250 miles of where we lived. And so you can see how important language learning is in Europe. And if you want to spend time in Europe, how valuable it can be to be learning French now and then eventually other languages related to French. So that's what he mentioned. And then about his own personal background. In this section, he and I use the past tense a great deal. And that's something you won't get into until Unit 6. Just a real quick background of the past tense or introduction to the past tense is that if I want to say I live, it's j'habite. If I want to say I lived in the past, I have to use the verb avoir. That's what's called a helping verb. J'ai, and then I take the verb habiter, and it'll have the same sound. It'll be spelled differently, but I'll say j'ai habité, for I lived. Or j'ai étudié, for I studied. Or j'ai, there was another one here we used, the two of us, and I don't remember what it was right now. I don't remember what it was right now, but in any case, if you hear a form where we're saying j'ai or vous avez, and then a verb that you do recognize, it's because we're speaking in the past tense. And so he talked about growing up near Lausanne, which is a beautiful city in Switzerland, and he studied le théâtre, which is the theater or acting, and then faire du théâtre would be to perform as an actor in the theater. And you heard last of all, he used the expression on va, talking about what he's going to do after work tonight with his family. On va faire le dîner ensemble et on va faire des jeux avec les enfants. On va, remember how I said that the expression nous, meaning we, can also be expressed as on, which can be translated as one, but it's the same value as the word we. And so if I want to say that we do such and such a thing, I can say on fait la cuisine, on habite en France. And in this case, on fait des jeux avec les enfants. Des jeux are games. Le jeu is game, and so he said we might play games tonight with the kids. Well, that's it. Thank you for participating in this video. I will try in the future to remember not to hit the wrong button when the interview is finished. Au revoir.